Hey friends, oligopoly refers to a small number of large firms in an industry whose strategies and actions depend largely on and affect other large firms in the same industry. Recall from our earlier video that oligopolistic firms are guided by three key concepts, namely interdependence, strategic behavior, and conflicting incentives. Some examples of oligopolies include your FMCG companies such as Coca-Cola, Mondelez, and PepsiCo. So building on these ideas, their market structure shares four key characteristics as we see on this slide. Firstly, in terms of number of firms, there is a small number of large firms. And because of this high concentration, there is also some degree of high market power. These small number of large firms have high control over their prices as well as the supply chain and quantities produced. Barriers to entry is also quite high, and these firms usually compete based on intense non-price competition, which I'll explain later. And lastly, in terms of product differentiation, there's quite significant product differentiation, especially because it helps these firms design a competitive edge. And as a result, they often invest significantly in differentiating their product, which they can finance through a large R&D budget from their strong market power and abnormal profits. So in terms of demand, revenues, and market outcomes, oligopolies behave like monopolies. They can set their own prices, they enjoy high barriers to entry, and they have allocative, inefficient market outcomes. And we can see all of these in this diagram over here, which if you recall is the exact same one as a monopoly. And in terms of the market outcomes diagram, we move to the diagram on the right, whereby the producer surplus is slightly higher than the consumer surplus, reflecting not only allocative inefficiency, but the degree of market power that oligopolies have. But I don't want to create the impression that oligopolies are the same as monopolies. Oligopolies are actually more nuanced than monopolies, which refer to just one dominant firm. As we see in this mind map on the first half of this slide, we can break oligopolies down into two main types, with collusive oligopoly as well as non-collusive oligopoly. So collusive oligopoly refers to firms that formally and explicitly agree to collude, which means that they form an agreement among themselves to limit competition, increase market power, and increase profits. So one example of a collusive oligopoly could be a cartel. And the most famous cartel would be OPEC, which is a group of oil producing countries in the Middle East. This cartel can hold oil prices constant at a level, or they can choose to raise prices by a fixed amount, or they can fix price differences between different products. And apart from OPEC, cartels are usually illegal because they limit competition. So this graph would be the graph that you draw should you be required to draw a graph for a cartel. And this graph also shows why firms potentially participate in cartel. Firstly, as we see in this yellow highlighted box, they could enjoy potentially abnormal profits over the long term. They can also increase their market power and control prices, and even eliminate competition among rivals. But cartels are not easy to create and maintain for four key reasons as reflected in this mind map. Firstly, and most importantly, every firm faces this incentive to cheat, which could potentially lead to the cartel collapsing. And this is reflected in the prisoner's dilemma scenarios, which we covered in an earlier video. Another challenge faced by cartels would be the cost differences between firms. So under the cartel model, all firms agree to set the same prices. But in reality, their cost structures across different firms can be different. So the lower cost firms with a more efficient cost structure may enjoy higher profits, but the higher cost firms suffer lower profits. So this leads to a lot of difficulty in terms of agreeing on common prices. Next, in terms of the number of firms, well, as more firms enter this cartel, it can be more and more difficult to agree on a common price to fix and how to allocate the output that is produced by the cartel. And lastly, there is always this possibility of a price war, which really results from the nature of an oligopoly and a cartel. One firm cutting the price would lead to other firms retaliating and lead to the scenario in the game theory or prisoner's dilemma discussion in the earlier video. So in the earlier part of this video, we covered collusive oligopoly as well as formal collusions. But another form of collusion would be what we call informal collusion, which means that there are no written agreements to collude, but this collusion is implicit or understood among the cooperating firms in the same industry so that they can achieve the same objectives of limiting competition and setting prices to maximize profits. And one type of informal collusion would be price leadership, where the most dominant firm with the highest market share sets a price, and then the other firms in the same industry or same category follow. Moving on to the second type of oligopoly, which is a non-collusive oligopoly. This refers to oligopolistic firms that do not collude in any way to coordinate prices and limit competition. So these firms behave independently, but they're highly aware of each other in their strategic decisions, especially in terms of the prices they set, as well as their non-price behaviors. So these strategies are influenced by expectations of how their competitors will react if they undertake a price change. And this discussion on oligopolies really present three key takeaways. Firstly, non-collusive oligopoly firms take into account rivals' actions when making pricing decisions. Secondly, this also results in price stability because it is not in any player's interest to enter into a price war. And lastly, what this means is that firms do not compete with each other on the basis of price, which places even more emphasis on non-price competition methods. And before closing this video on oligopolies, I wanted to talk about the concentration ratio. So concentration ratio measures the market concentration by indicating the percentage of output produced by the largest firms in an industry. So for example, if we say that a three-firm concentration ratio of an industry is 78%, this means that the three largest firms in that one industry produces 78% of the industry's total output.